This morning, Ukrainians told to take shelter as Russia launched yet another major aerial assault on Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say Russia fired some 55 missiles all across the country overnight, aimed specifically at energy facilities. And while nearly 24 of those missiles were shut down, many did hit their targets. One man killed by falling missile fragments. This latest round of attacks comes, not coincidentally, just hours after the U.S. and several European allies vowed to send tanks to Ukraine, something President Zelensky has been asking for months. Joining me now to discuss, former CIA Director and former U.S. CENTCOM Commander General David Petraeus. General, thanks so much for joining this morning.
Good to be with you.
So you're aware of the debate leading up to this. There appears to be unity now among Western allies. Are tanks the weapon that Ukrainian forces need now?
Absolutely. Ideally, we'd have made this decision even a bit earlier so that they can train fully on them and integrate them into their forces. But without tanks, you don't have the centerpiece of the kind of combined arms operations that will be necessary to enable Ukraine to have successful counteroffensive operations this spring and summer to liberate more of their territory from Russian occupation. It's interesting that in the Kremlin, they downplayed the issue of tanks, just said, well, this might delay things a little bit. But of course, it's the punitive actions, it's the punishment that they're meeting out with these 55 missiles that they shot at Ukraine last night. Again, targeting, of course, civilian infrastructure, not military. Again, a violation of the laws of land warfare. But at the end of the day, this is a very significant development. Clearly, the United States ultimately recognized that it's necessary for them to give a certain number of our M1 Abrams tanks to get Germany to agree to send their Leopards and also to allow Poland and other countries to send their Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine as well. But this is a major development. It will enable the offensives that are necessary for Ukraine and without which they just couldn't have conducted.
As you're aware, one factor in all these weapons decisions, going back to the very start of the war, has been not just is this the right weapon for Ukraine, but also could this go too far so as to provoke Russia into some sort of retaliation or escalate the conflict into one between the West and Russia? Do you have any concern about tanks raising that risk too far?
Not really. No, I don't think that this is going to trigger something. And I think actually we have done, now the countries, the U.S., the Western countries, have done quite a good job of conveying to Russia that if they were to use, for example, tactical nuclear weapons or attack a NATO country, Russia would end up in a worse situation than it was before it chose that option. And so I think that deterrence is at play here. I don't think this is the issue that would result in some escalation that should be of enormous concern to us. Although, again, all they could do is just launch what we hope is a dwindling number of their missiles at Ukraine last night.
This war has taken on many characteristics of a war of attrition, just horrendous military casualties on those battlefields in the East without much forward or backwards progress, as well as you referenced, tremendous civilian casualties as Russia tries to rain down, punishment in effect on them. Do you see anything changing that dynamic in the coming months?
Yes, what I hope is that we will continue to do everything that we can to enable Ukraine to convince Vladimir Putin that this war is unsustainable, keeping in mind that Russia's already lost at least 8 times the soldiers in 11 months that they lost in nearly 10 years of war in Afghanistan, of course, which was unsustainable for the USSR. And also that as we tighten further the economic, financial, and personal sanctions and export controls on Russia, that we can convince Putin that this war is unsustainable on the home front as well. That's got to be the objective, because until Putin recognizes that he's not going to achieve his ultimate goals and that the war is not sustainable, there won't be meaningful negotiations. And at that point, Ukraine, which will need a Marshall-like plan for reconstruction, will need an ironclad security guard, and obviously needs to stop the damage. Then you could have meaningful discussions and a resolution through negotiations.
You mentioned the Afghan war, which many, looking back historically, say was a factor in the collapse of the Soviet Union. What is your level of concern, hope even, if you want to describe it that way, but what is the threat to Putin's government from his ongoing troubles and high costs from the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, no, that can't be discounted. And of course, we all think that this is inconceivable right now. You know, you look at a kleptocracy, a dictatorship like this, and say there's no way that anybody could ever mount a coup against this and survive. But of course, that's right before it is all of a sudden inevitable. And we've seen this during the Arab Spring, Iran decades ago, all the others where the regime seems to be incredibly solid right up until it's not. And so this has to be a concern for Putin. It's another of the elements that should play in as we try all together to hasten that moment when he recognizes that this is an unsustainable endeavor. He needs to negotiate some resolution and to get out of it.
Yeah, perhaps the reason he sits at all those long tables when we see him in the Kremlin. General David Petraeus, always good to have you on.
Thanks, Jim. Good to be with you.